Hello, my name is Sonia Hong, and I am interviewing today Marietta Shipley. She hired me for my first job out of law school when she was the circuit court judge for Davidson County in the Second Circuit. Today is Friday, March 22nd, 2019, and we are here at the offices of the Nashville Bar Association. This interview is being conducted for the Legal History Project of the Nashville Bar Association. So can you please tell us your full name and where and when you were born?
My name is Marietta Mundinger Shipley. I was born December 18th, 1945.
And where were you born?
I was born in Kansas City, Kansas, at KU Medical Center.
And was that where you grew up, in Kansas City? Can you tell us about your family and growing up?
Well, I'm an only child. I had a stillborn brother, just thought about today. So that meant my father was a Lutheran minister, and my mother was sort of like Mrs. Minister, the old style minister's wife. And we lived in Kansas City until I was in the 6th grade, and just ordinary little street neighborhood. Then we moved to St. Louis, and they lived there until I was a senior in college. And St. Louis was a very interesting city. My father's church was the church for the Concordia Seminary, the Lutheran seminary. So I had lots of friends who were seminary professors' kids. So I didn't really suffer from being a preacher's kid because there were a lot of preacher's kids.
Where did you go to college?
I went to the University of Kansas. My father was very big on education. His entire 5 of his brothers were all ministers. I think everyone had been sent to college at his level. My mother also. So it was never a question of going to college. At that time, I was going to become a nurse because, as you may or may not know, there wasn't much for a woman to do except be a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary. And my aunt was a wonderful nurse. She brought babies into the world. And so I thought that's what I would do. Well, I could go to the University of Kansas or the University of Michigan, but Kansas had like a work scholarship. You lived in a scholarship hall, and you had to clean the bathrooms or make cookies or fix dinner. And I was relegated to cookie maker. But making cookies for 50 people, I was not very good at. The cookies kept sliding off the tray. So they assigned me to bathroom duty or something. Anyway, the best part of my college life was, probably the best thing that happened was I got a D in chemistry the first year. So I was not apparently real good in the sciences, and went to Germany that summer for a summer, 2 months in the summer in a little tiny town in Germany. And I came back and decided Germany was much more interesting than going to nursing school. So I switched majors, and then when I was a junior, I did a junior year abroad in Bonn, Germany. So that decision really has shaped a lot of my life for interest in foreign languages and for travel, and probably was, the most transformative year of my earlier life.
So what year were you in Bonn for your abroad?
65 to 66 was the year the Beatles came out. I remember we did a talent show. The Americans did a talent show, and my German family made fur, made fur coats and stuff. And so they made us all Beatles hats or Beatle wigs so we could sing, I want to hold your hand in German. Ich möchte deine Hand.
That is so cool. And I guess that the wall had gone up, I guess, in the late 40s in Berlin. And
No,
Bonn
that
was
didn't go up till later,
the 50s.
60s. Yeah, I think it wasn't all that new. But, you know, we took trips to Berlin. I'll never forget, they put us on the bus. We had a tour bus and went to the East German border, and they said we couldn't cross until the next morning. So we were on the bus without a toilet for all night. And then we got off the bus, and they made us go on some kind of mat that they had put disinfectant so we wouldn't bring hoof and mouth disease into East Germany. Oh, and I remember also at Checkpoint Charlie, I remember, had all these American passports, and so they would start taking from the top. Well, then when they got to the American passports, then they'd start taking from the bottom. So, I mean, they did everything they could to, you know, frustrate you and scare you, really. So, anyway, but it was a great experience. It's just a souvenir shop now in Checkpoint Charlie.
So after college, did you get a degree in German?
In German and history. And then I didn't have anything to do, so they were giving away Master of Arts in Teaching scholarships. And so I stayed at Kansas University and got a Master of Degree in teaching of German. What's interesting is Aleda Trauger, another, who's now a federal judge, she had a master's degree in teaching of either English or French. I mean, many of the original women attorneys were teachers before they went to law school, which is interesting.
Do you think that ties back to, like, as you said, the options for women were nurse or teacher? Mm-hmm. And do you think a lot of people came through that?
I think they did. When I never even knew a lawyer before I went to law. Well, not right before, but as growing up, I didn't know any lawyers. Obviously, didn't know any women lawyers. So that was, you know, I guess it was sort of breaking a new mold when we all started to law school.
So did you go to law school after receiving your master's?
Well, first I went to Washington and D.C. because my parents lived there, and I moved in with some wonderful friends in Georgetown. One worked at the White House, one was admissions director for Georgetown, and one worked at an embassy. So it was a whole new experience, very different than Kansas. I mean, it was so many different people and different ideas. It was a very exciting time. If you remember, it was also a very tragic time. That was 68, the first time I went to Washington. I flew into the airport and there was smoke coming up from the city because of the riots after Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And then that summer, I had come home from school and watched Bobby Kennedy get shot in California while I was watching. So it was a very tumultuous time. And also, what's the book that's sort of the feminist guide? So that came out. And it was really the early serious beginnings of feminism. And I was the first subscriber to Ms. Magazine, remember that. So anyway, was in Washington. I taught English at the American Express School, and then I taught German at a school in Virginia for 3 years. And during that time, I met my husband, Alex. And Alex wanted to be in politics, and he knew you had to be from somewhere. You couldn't be a politician that lived in Washington. So he wanted to go back to Tennessee, and I had never been to Tennessee. I think maybe I had been to Memphis. That was the only southern city I'd ever been to. I'd been everywhere else in the United States, but somehow we never went south. And I had a very stereotypical view of Nashville at that time, or what the South would be like. And to a certain extent, it was pretty stodgy, to say the least, in Nashville. I mean, you couldn't get a job as a lawyer if you'd gone to UT. I mean, it was so Vanderbilt-centric for lawyers. There was one Oriental restaurant and one Spanish restaurant, and one restaurant that had an interesting appetizer, being some kind of bean dip. That was it. I mean, you went to O'Charlie's, and on the wine list was Boone's Farm apple wine. Okay. So coming here today with 3 new hotels on 4th Avenue, Nashville is like a total transformation, fortunately, mostly for the good.
So when did you move down to Nashville from D.C.?
That would have been 71. Got married in 71. Before I was so then when we moved, couldn't get a teaching job right off, so I worked for a law firm as a legal secretary. Probably didn't get the best reviews on that, but I had learned to type. John Branham was my first boss, and I think he was really kind of glad when I walked into his office one day and said I was quitting because I had gotten a job as a teacher and was going to law school, because I figured I could do as good a job as he was doing at the time. So anyway, I went to law school because my husband was a lawyer. All his friends, they started off in the Attorney General's office. It was a new division. Previously, there had been 4 lawyers in the Attorney General's office. I don't know, how many are there now?
Gosh, there's easily over like 130 or so.
Yeah.
At least.
At least, yeah. And so he was part of the 4th floor gang. So all those people became friends of ours. They were all lawyers, and a number of their wives were going to go to law school. So I figured German was kind of a dead end because, Tennessee, in its wisdom, had banned German after the Second World War. It could not teach German. And it sounds like all the other conservative things our legislature does. And so I knew I could not go very far in that. So why not? Could go to law school at night and teach during the day. So obviously that was a lot less expensive than going to Vanderbilt or, I don't know, commuting to UT or something.
So was this the Nashville School of Law
Yeah.
that you attended?
At the time it was called the Y School of Law. And I made some of the best friends that I've ever had there. Tom Thurman, who became deputy DA, Barbara Haynes, who was also a judge, Kathy Solaro, who was commissioner of revenue, and those became some of my best buddies and friends throughout my career.
And so you graduated from law school in 1976 or
Yes.
so?
Uh-huh.
And what was the next step for you then?
This is kind of interesting. I went to law school. I taught for 3 years while I was in law school. And the last year, I was a law clerk for Schulman, Hollins, Pride, and something. Okay. The only one that's left, I'm not sure. But anyway, I was a full-time law clerk for them. I was not offered a job as an associate, which was not typical, which was not atypical at that time. Very few women were offered any jobs in a private firm. And some of the, more well-known people who graduated in '76 was Aleda Trauger. She was, Bob Brandt hired her, or George, in that firm. Margaret Behm went to legal services. Somebody else went to Metro Legal Services. And so I had nothing at the time. So Henry Hale, who was a good friend of my husband, he said, fine, you can just hang out and I'll give you some cases. So the first case was trying to sell houses in North Nashville for a drug dealer. And so you had to go to the house, inspect it, and set up the auction, which of course I knew nothing about, but being a lawyer, you just figure it out. Except the first house I went to was full of fleas. And so here I go in. I got fleas everywhere, and I'm driving up I-65, swatting those fleas. Oh, it was miserable. So anyway, then somehow I met Steve North, who was a judge of the Fifth Circuit Court. And he was much less conservative than most of the other judges. And he thought court officers didn't need to be 90 years old. And maybe he could use one as a law clerk. What a brilliant idea. And so he hired me and had some really interesting cases, and I really enjoyed getting to know Steve North. He had won a contested election to get there, and his wife was interesting, and she eventually became Register of Taxes or Deeds, I'm not sure which one. So I did that for 6 months, and then Tom Thurmond and I were approached by the DA, by Judge Shriver, Tom Shriver. And he hired Tom and I to create the child support division of the DA's office. Now, all Tom wanted was a job. Okay, I probably had more interest in the actual job. But Tom was not one to micromanage. He said, your office is going to be over in the Stallman building, and here's 4,000 cases, and just do it. It was a new federal program, Roman numeral 4-D, and it was trying to collect child support for all the women who were on welfare. And so we just kind of made it up as we went. We had 2 investigators, we had 2 secretaries, and we legitimated a lot of children. So every Thursday, we would take about 20 people over to Judge Gayton, and he would legitimate our couples and try to get child support from them. So that was really pretty interesting. And then this was all pre-computer. So we had 40 Rolodexes with the women's names in it, and we had a fatal flaw. We should have cross-referenced the 3 or 4 fathers that went with every woman. So you had your card, your mother, the 3 children. It was. I think what it did is it certainly you understood that what the law could be and do and help people who weren't getting any support. Help the government, I suppose, get some of their support back. But, it was sort of the beginning of a whole system where there's more support for women and children than there had been before, and certainly at a higher level. So I enjoyed that, and it was a really good experience. You just had to stand up and start talking. I mean, you didn't have like a course in how to be a plaintiff's lawyer. You learn by standing up and doing it. So Tom then wanted to go into the criminal part of the DA's office. And so when I was in the Stallman building one morning, I got a call, and it was my husband, Alex. No, it wasn't him. It was about my husband, Alex. I said, oh, I'll call him later. And she said, no, you have to come right now. Well, what had happened is my husband had been running around the First American Gym, or runway, whatever, and he collapsed at the sink. He had a heart attack. He was 37, I was 34. It was obviously a total major shock to my life, which had been kind of going along in a fairly nice little pace, but it was pretty conservative and on and on. So I had to change my whole life. It happened that most of the friends I had, they had kids and dogs and stuff, and I didn't have any of that. So you really, it was an interesting time to be single. I was single for 8 years, I believe. And so I don't know, March, he died in July. I don't remember exactly when, but in the following 6-8 months, Margaret Behm approached me and said, was I interested in going into private practice with her? So we would be the first women lawyers in a firm, in a private firm. And why not? Okay, sounded like an adventure. And it was. We probably didn't make gobs of money for sure, but we had a fun time. We got a lot of advice from her, at that point boyfriend, later husband, and we were received very well in the legal community. There were lots of men or men lawyers that would give us some guidance on what to accept for, an auto crash or something. We learned a lot about employment. That was when bankruptcy first started, or the new rules. Now it's the old rules, but at the time it was the new rules, 1980. So Margaret got into bankruptcy. I did a lot of family law. She did some family law. We both did employment discrimination and that kind of thing at the time. So that was a great part of my life. I started traveling with lots of different friends, which had not really been part of my life with Alex. So it was, as sad as it was that Alex died, I think it sort of propelled me into a whole nother life, which I was grateful for.
Was it challenging finding clients when you were Shipley and Behm?
Well, yes. I think we thought that women would flock to an all-women firm, but that really wasn't the case. I think the general populace was still thinking that the male was the one who would give her the best guidance. I think it took a long time before the general populace has recognized that a woman lawyer can really be a good lawyer. And so consequently, you have to be the best, you have to be the best prepared. It's like any minority entering into an establishment system. And so you would get referrals. You would work, you would talk to, what shall I say, more successful lawyers and say, okay, if you need to have a divorce done, blah, 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 give us a call. Or, Margaret did a lot of debtors work. Well, that eventually morphed into working for the companies instead of just the debtors. So, first I had a few criminal cases, but that was when they had sentencing, I don't know, it was X or Z or some stupid thing, that you had an automatic 10 years if you were arrested for armed robbery. Well, my first armed robbery was not very smart. And he robbed a 7-Eleven, and he had an orange t-shirt, an orange tank top on, so he was very visible, and he left the money right in the middle of his car. So the police had a beat on him immediately, followed him, arrested him, saw the money. I mean, we were dead to rights. I was so worried that his co-defendants were not going to take a plea. I mean, you could take a plea, but if you went to court, it was 10 years automatic. So, I was so nervous that they wouldn't have thought that I had to go to court and defend him when I had nothing. So I wasn't real big on criminal cases. I think that's always been difficult for me. It's very, to me, a civil case, okay, you lose money, you lose money. But in a criminal case, I mean, when you start losing your freedom, then that's really something that you can't get back very easily. So that may have had something to do with my not wanting to put a lot of people in jail who didn't pay their child support. So Margaret and I were during that whole time, we also were a very political firm. Walter Kurtz was probably the first one when he ran for public defender. And so then he ran for judge, and then various other people ran for judge and public defender and mayor. I think Harlan was helping Betty Nixon when Bredesen ran the first time. So we supported, and Margaret and Harlan particularly gave a lot of guidance to political candidates. And it was really the ushering in of really good officials, ones that weren't tied like to stuffing ballot boxes and other dumb things. So the year I ran, Andy Shukoff was running for juvenile judge. That would have been running around Christmas of '89, I think. And I never thought about a political office particularly, although I had, that's not really true. When I moved to Nashville, I ran for the Democratic County Committee. I'd been here 6 months, and I ran and won that because I had seen a lot of that in Washington. You know, people would be by the side of the road waving and so forth. So I get my little VW bug, put signs all around Shipley for committee woman, and beat all kinds of people. So that was the start of my political career. And then I was the county on the state committee. Those committees were only interesting because they were the selection process for General Sessions judges, for circuit judges, for Supreme Court judges. So they had a lot more power than they do now. Now it's pretty boring. So anyway, Judge Lester was the judge of the Second Circuit Court. He had been there, I don't think he'd served a full term, I can't remember. And he got very sick. He had a heart attack and was out for 6 months. And then he still seemed to be ill, and so we just kind of were thinking, well, you know, he said he wanted to serve another year, and we didn't really think that that was a very good way to elect a judge. And he had some very colorful things that he would do. His court officers would fall asleep. If he didn't like the verdict of a plaintiff's, a verdict for the, if the jury did not give a verdict for the plaintiff, he would chase them down the hall and, you know, yell at them and scream at them. I mean, it was pretty crazy. Okay. So I raised my hand and said, I'll run. Little did I know how much that entailed. But it was fortunately a very short race. It was only 2 months for me.
Were there any other candidates in the field?
Well, at one time, Casey Moreland was in the field. Judge Haynes called him up and said he shouldn't run for that. I guess it was a good idea he didn't. And so it was just Lester and me. And what was interesting, a lot of the bar, of course, did not support me because a bar generally supports the incumbent because they know what the incumbent does, whether they like it or not. They know what he'll do, and they can adjust accordingly. But there were a number of, I would say, courageous lawyers that were very supportive of me, and without that, I could not have won. I was on TV. It was one of the first times that you had a lot of TV commercials. I had a great commercial. Donna Culver, who I was just talking to on the phone, she did my commercials, and she was top-notch. So it was very interesting because it was the first time women had run really in Davidson County, except Muriel had, I think she was appointed. I can't remember. She was the only woman judge in Davidson County. And so that year, Penny Harrington ran, and Barbara had run for General Sessions judge 8 years before, so there were the two of them. And so that was now 4 in Davidson County. And then there were 5 others in the rest of the state. So it was the first year that you had a significant number of women judges. And so I did that for 16 years.
And so what kind of cases did you see in your courtroom?
I was kind of schizophrenic. After the first year, Judge Kurtz asked me whether I would take at least a quarter of the family cases. So I had my regular share of jury cases, and then I had a quarter of the family cases. Muriel had the other 3 quarters. So it was, the different parts of the bar are very separate, the ones who do family law and the ones who do civil law. There weren't very many women who were doing civil law. When you had a motion docket on Fridays, I always hoped the women wore really bright colors so they could stand out in all these dark suits all the time. We were always so serious. And family lawyers are kind of like their clients. I mean, they get all emotional and act a little crazy sometimes. It's just, it's more interesting, although it's very messy, and I felt like, I could have much more of an impact on the family cases than I could on car wrecks or malpractice cases. But it is interesting. The first year I was a judge in 1990, I did 40 jury cases, which is, I guess, an average of 1 a week or so. Well, it would be more since one of my weeks was always non-jury, so out of 3, whatever. Okay, it was a lot. The last year I was there, I did 11, and I think it was 11. That was the most of any judge that year.
In circuit court.
Which meant that the jury cases, it's really rare now to have a civil jury case. I'm sure there's still a lot in criminal. And I think I had a big part in that with my interest in mediation. I always attribute, let me see how I can say this. Mediation to me is not only a concept, it was a romantic engagement that led me more to mediation. I had to make a speech about child custody, and I read a paragraph in the American Bar Association journal about mediation. So I talked about mediation like I knew something about it. And my husband-to-be was in the audience, and he thought I was kind of cute, so he came up to me. And eventually we had a first date, et cetera, and eventually we got married in 86, I guess. Yeah, I think it was 86. So out of that, constantly being exposed to how a psychologist thinks, or sort of the softer side of how you make decisions, I went to my first training in California in 1989. So when I became a judge, it was very coincidental because Sissy Daughtry had been appointed, and then in 88, and then I think was serving a term starting in 90. So she was instrumental in putting together, asking the Bar Association to put a panel, or I guess it was just a committee, together to study alternative dispute resolution. And so I was one of 3 judges because she knew how interested I was. And one of her best friends was a judge in Washington, and they had the multi-door courthouse. So she knew much more than your average person would know, because except for Lynn Barton, there really wasn't much going on. So after that committee met, then we made a proposal to the Supreme Court to have a commission, and I was on the commission. So that was that was like I don't know, I think the rule came out in 96, so that was a 6 or 7 year process.
Yeah, I think it was 1992 that the Rule 31 was passed.
I don't think so. No, I'm sure it wasn't. That was when the commission started. I'm pretty sure it was December of 96. I mean, it wasn't immediate. I mean, even after we came up with the rule, it took them another year to put it together, because Penny was they kept passing it from judge to judge to judge, and she was the newest judge, so she had the biggest impact on the final version of it. Penny White. So before that, we started doing, I was interested in it. There were some mediators, and I would refer some cases to them. And we had a pretty good program. We had a sliding scale of mediation, and it was relatively effective. But there was very much resistance from the bar, and especially from the family bar, about mediation. I don't know. I guess they thought somehow we were gonna tell them what to do, and they didn't want any changes. They liked the way things were. They were in total control, because the thing is, with alternative dispute resolution, you got to have somebody asking the question, would you consider settlement in this case, without blinking first? I mean, that was, in the olden days, I think lawyers would get together over coffee and settle cases. But once the rules of civil procedure came in 72, I think, somewhere in the 70s, then they retreated back to their corners of interrogatories and production of documents and depositions and all this stuff, because it follows a nice little pattern. And lawyers are good at following rules. But ADR came in. Now we have a new pattern. But ADR came in. It took them a long time to think that they would be giving up some control to a mediator to help them resolve the case. So all I wanted as a judge, the only part that I cared about in the rule, was that I had the ability to refer people to mediation. I guess I could refer them with an order after I had met with them. And so out of that really grew the fact that you can't do any of this unless you have case management. Now, case management is a word that lawyers don't always like, because they don't like anybody to manage them until they get used to it. And then they think, oh, well, let's be managed, because that will make it easier for us. So this whole era really from 2000 on, I guess. Now most cases go to mediation. In our county, Marsh Nichols is the one who meets with them and sends them to mediation, monitors them, cases are very organized, and then a few cases are still tried. And I think that's probably true in most jurisdictions now. Same is true in family. And I think it's easier for the lawyers in the civil cases with the mediation. Hopefully, in the family cases, it has some lasting effect that people are able to talk to each other. At least there is that chance. Not so much with cases that are in court, but if cases are mediated before they go to court, then that's I think it can be very helpful with communication.
I remember you telling me when I was a law clerk for you that parties in domestic cases would be more likely to follow up on a mediation agreement if they had a hand in coming to these decisions as opposed to a judge handing down a ruling telling them what they're supposed to do.
Well, I think that is very true. I mean, I have found that even after I stopped being a judge, you know, if they have some way that they're not admitting anything, you know, and we're not dwelling on the fault, if they can come together even on difficult things, that agreement will work better for them because they did have a hand in how it got formed. But I want to digress for a second since you mentioned that you were my law clerk. That was really one of the biggest joys of my tenure as a judge. I don't know how many I had, probably 15, something like that. And you were all very, very different. And it just gave me an opportunity to meet some wonderful young aspiring lawyers and help them along the way. Because a trial judge is very different than like a federal judge. Federal judge, you're kind of given an assignment and you go off and you write your brief on it. In our court, we were kind of like a family, so you would, you know, had several other employees and the new law clerk, and you had to bring the new law clerk along and so forth. And I found that wonderful. And as you know, we still usually meet once a year, find out who's got new babies or new divorces or new something or other. So that was really a joy for me. And I did strive to have people from every law school in the state and, you know, lots of other people from other countries or other cultures because we were very selfish. It just enriched our lives to have so many different people, and we never really had a dud. We had one who is this incredible First Amendment scholar, David Hudson. But from a practical point of view, we gave him one of those umbrella hats because he didn't know how to, as they say, come in from the rain. But and some of our people were wonderful cooks. We had lots of wonderful food in our court. So
I feel like my clerkship was an incomparable experience. You introduced me to so many attorneys and how to practice law, how not to practice law.
Mm-hmm.
We saw so much
right.
that year, and it was just an exposure.
I think that's true, and I'm glad that you had that experience. I think any aspiring trial attorney would be well served by working for a trial judge.
Absolutely. And I also felt like I was embraced into the fold of the Second Circuit family. Mm-hmm. And actually it was a bit of a rude shock when I started at the Attorney General's office. And I was in team one of a division with about maybe 25 attorneys. Uh-huh. And it was like, what, we don't go out to lunch together? And we don't cook for each other? And I was just like, what is going on here?
I never thought about that. Well, It's probably because I don't have any kids, you know, and anyway, pick people who work well with you. Lots of fun. So I guess another thing that I was very interested in was trying to make the law more accessible for pro se persons. We even would make pro se forms available to guys, generally guys, in jail. And they'd muddle through somehow. We'd send them instructions on what to do. And that eventually led into, you know, eventually the Supreme Court, you know, had a whole pro bono commission and all of that. But I felt like we had really kind of started that, and we were trying to get forms approved through the Bar Association so we could start that program. And so by the time all of that happened, I was kind of running out of ideas of what to do as a judge, because you can promote some things, but you're still a little island. So I decided then that I would, retire. I guess I was 60 when I retired, and see what private practice was like in mediation. And I had great aspirations. I had a wonderful group of people on my list, but I found that unlike some other states where they had like a central office and people just called the office and they assigned the mediators, that in Tennessee we're a volunteer state and we're very individual, and you hire the mediator because you know the mediator, not because you know of this JM's office or some other office that you get it. So I tried doing that for several years, and I would say now I pretty much operate as just a sole mediator, and I do mediations and arbitrations for the AAA, American Arbitration Association, and other persons that comes about. I also first gathered the folks together for collaborative law practice in the family field, and that has been a very interesting history in our little group. Collaborative law is simply put that you have a divorce, you have two lawyers, one representing each person, you have a mental health person and you have a financial person. And it's like you have meetings. Best part is you have meetings, you have it on your calendar. People can't drag you to court about stupid motions, but it's just like building a new family by having parts of the team meet with the professional that they're meeting with. And that allows then everybody to support both the often children, try to figure out their more complicated financial stuff, and at the end you hopefully have an agreement. It fits the need for people who really need a lawyer, who can't make decisions just on their own. But the purpose of the collaborative is to work for the family, not just for your very own client. So that has, it has grown and then decreased and grown and decreased. Right now we are waiting for the Supreme Court to come out with the rule on collaborative. It's been pending. We've been at this for 4 years, I think. But I will be very proud when it is finished. I think it'll be it won't be used by everybody. It won't be like mediation. Because mediation, when we had a rule, then it was a rule that lawyers could follow. Collaborative is going to be more selective. The way it is presently designed, it's probably primarily for people who have a fair amount of money. But I think it is a real alternative that people could choose.
And is this a relationship in the collaborative practice that is ongoing as the client's needs change?
Well, you cannot represent them in any court area. I think surely the client could call the lawyer. As long as you were not in court, you could probably reconvene or do that. But it's primarily designed to be just for the divorce. Even the financial, she cannot do other financial things for them after the divorce. And the mental health is also, it's not to replace your regular therapist. It's just to help you get through the emotions of the divorce. And so it's interesting. And
Yeah, it seems like a holistic approach.
it is. I never thought about that. Yeah, it is a holistic approach.
So, do you think you'll retire at some point?
Well, I'm certainly not working 9 to 5 every day. We travel a whole lot.
What are some of the places you've been to?
Well, we have a little place in Utah, in Park City. So we spend 6 weeks in the summer. We just got back from skiing. We go there for Sundance. Over Christmas, we went to Africa, to Tanzania, to the Serengeti, saw giraffes and lions and elephants and baboons and leopards, cheetahs. So that was a once-in-a-lifetime trip for sure. But we've gone to various places in Europe. We've gone to China. Also, we got going to Utah in the summer. We traveled across the country, 3, 4, 5 days at a time, and I really enjoyed that. There's, when people travel, they always go to Europe or go to China or something. But just seeing the world on a deserted highway in Montana is really pretty interesting. And so I really cherish those road trips. People don't take road trips very much. Did as a child, I remember. But so I'm game to go anywhere. We're taking some river cruise in May. That seems a little tame to me, but I thought maybe I'd save that till I was 80 or so.
Which river will you be
The
exploring?
Danube.
Oh.
End up in Budapest. So my memories of Budapest when I was a student, that would have been deep into communist times. And so, we had nothing. We were staying in hotels for $1 a night, so we didn't have a lot. And these people were trying to buy our jeans or clothes. They'd buy anything we had on. But since we didn't have much, we couldn't really sell them anything. We took a trip to Russia, and you could sell nylons or ballpoint pens, and
Did they want to buy them because they were items to buy or because they were American items?
They were American items. And then they'd pay you in rubles, and then you'd go to the gum store and buy vodka or caviar or what stone they have, I forget, the yellowish stone. Amber.
Oh,
You
amber.
could buy amber things. So, it was a tiny glimpse into a world that we are, just not cognizant of. We are so fortunate in where we live, and it's just hard to see it at the ground level. And that's not even people who suffer disasters. That's just people with bad government. So as I work now, people say, well, are you still working? I said, well, yeah, because I work to travel, to pay my credit card bills. And I truly enjoy it, and I'm now really deep into studying Spanish because I have a lot of Hispanic clients and friends. And so I hope to really continue that. We've gone to San Miguel. We were in Barcelona this year also, and I went to a language school there. So all of that helps me try to speak Spanish better.
Do you have any projects on the back burner that might come to the forefront?
Well, I don't know about that. I've kind of taken up 2 more hobbies. One, I talked to Donna Culver. We get together every Friday and we paint. So I've been working on that. I've taken up bridge in the last year and a half. Very obsessed with that now. So anything that keeps your mind going and introduces you to new people is a really good thing when you're in this age group. Because otherwise you just get kind of stuck, do the same routines. So I have no reason why I have to stop. If I feel like I don't want to do it anymore, I'll just stop. But my office is at my house, so it's a long commute from the kitchen to the office, or running for the phone. And my husband is a psychologist, and he works every day from 1 to 6 or so. And so I think it's a nice thing for lawyers. They've been introduced to so many different venues and thoughts. I mean, I always think it's amazing what you can do as a lawyer. Just by saying, I'm so-and-so and I'm a lawyer. People they perk up when you say that. People come to me, they can speak hardly any English. Okay. Within 15 minutes, I can figure out who's the person to call. They will take my call if they're not in Nashville. I can't get lawyers to call me back in Nashville. And they will, and I can get back to them with the most information. When they were like totally clueless, and so I'm kind of like seen as a little island that might be able to help them. And I think that's what being a lawyer is all about. It's not that you know anything. It's that you know that there are ways that you can follow the path to get the information that is necessary for you. And so you're never quite without resources. It helps to have a computer. But I find that that's one of the real wonderful things about it. You can do so many different things with a law degree. And I don't know, I think one of the things on your sheet was, would you advise a young woman or a young man to be a lawyer? I don't know. I think I would probably advise them to be a business person. Because I think that's more of a frontier than lawyers are. I mean, women lawyers have pretty much populated what they want to. They're in government, they're in private practice. I don't think they necessarily want to be the head of a 500-person law firm because they have other lives, okay? So I think women are much better at balancing their work life and trying to figure out what's important. So I think if a young woman wanted to become a lawyer, it's a good basic thing. It's a good way to spend 3 years in law school. They can never take that away from you, whether you have a baby or not have a baby. It's very good training. It's good training in how to think and how to be curious and how to discover and how not to be afraid and how to stand up and say, I'm here, pay attention. So I think from all those aspects, being a lawyer is a good profession. I don't know if it's wonderful. I think we're still struggling. We have been struggling over this ever since we became lawyers, women lawyers, is how you have a family, how you following the right track, how you can progress, how you can be promoted. I don't think we've begun to solve that. But I think we are learning that men have the same struggles. Finally, we're kind of in this together because men have taken on much more roles of raising children and helping with household things, liking, to do activities. And I think once that happens, even more so, it will be easier for everybody. And we may finally get rid of the hourly hours or the amount of hours that are necessary to be in a private firm. Even though you're paid a lot of money, you have no life. And, you can choose to do that. But I think you need to know going in that's kind of a bargain with the devil, if you ask me. Be a young person, make that much money, and then be expected to work around the clock. So, but there are so many other things that women lawyers can do. And the Attorney General's office has always been a real wonderful place, I think, for women lawyers. When you have interesting work, you're paid enough, you can take time off if you need to. You can probably arrange job sharing and all of that. It's much easier in a government office. So I think that's why there's so many women in the Attorney General's office.
Yes, I think we are supported, and also even back in 1996 when I was looking for a job, I noticed there were quite a few female deputy attorney generals. So they were in positions of management, and the chief deputy was Patsy Cottrell.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
so I felt like this was a place I could move up and advance, that there was that opportunity for me.
Well, back when we first graduated, that was about the only place that women could go. And I met some of those women originally, and then I think that's why living in Nashville is it's more interesting, and it's more diverse, and it has been forced. If it doesn't happen naturally, it's been forced to be more inclusive. So therefore, it becomes more interesting because then you have different viewpoints, you have different people, you have different expectations, and it doesn't become quite so polarized like it does in some other cities.
Do you see that being reflected not only in Nashville, the population, but also in the legal community?
Yes, I think so too. There's something about the women in Nashville. It's ever since I have been here, the women to me are the really strong part of Nashville. We're the ones who, we took down the Y, let women in. We took down the City Club, the Cumberland Club. I mean, when Sissy Daughtry was on the Court of Appeals, she was the only judge in the state, and they'd have lunch over there, and they all had to sit in the women's room because they wouldn't let them in the rest. You just have to laugh about it now, but it was pretty crazy. And it just takes longer in Knoxville and Memphis and wherever else. It's just more parochial. And so I think the legal community reflects that, as well as now it's a wonder you got people. I mean, Nashville is a hockey town. How did that happen? Well, it's because people from the north came down and thought it would be interesting to play hockey. We have also had really wonderful, good mayors the whole time. Just so sad about Megan Barry. And that has made Nashville a really interesting city. Not that there aren't other cities that have a lot to offer, but consistently, you can tell by the legislature. They're jealous of Nashville, so they keep trying to keep us from operating the way we would like to. So, I don't know.
Do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I think, again, I'm just so proud and happy of all the women lawyer friends I have, and am glad in my dotage to make new friends, even with my bridge people. They're all interesting people who I've never met before, and I'll do almost anything that's different and be curious about, and obviously I have more time to do that now, and who knows what'll happen. Maybe I'll decide to do some other project, but I feel like I've contributed a lot to the profession, and the profession has given so much to me, for which I'm very, very grateful. So I guess that's about all.
All right. Well, thank you so much.